Lena's one-night stand turns into a nightmare when she learns her mysterious lover is a ruthless mafia boss. Now, trapped in his dangerous world, can she escape, or will she become his obsession? The notification lit up Lena's phone screen like a bomb waiting to detonate. Her best friend Mandy's name flashed across the top, followed by a single image that would shatter her world. Lena's fingers trembled as she opened the message. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was seeing. Jake, her fiancé, stood in what looked like a hotel lobby, his arms wrapped possessively around a slim blonde woman. His smile was the same one he'd given Lena just that morning when he'd kissed her goodbye. Her stomach lurched. The timestamp on the photo was from 2 hours ago. "No," she whispered, her voice breaking in the quiet of their shared apartment. "No, no, no." More photos followed. Jake and the woman entering an elevator. Jake kissing her neck. Each image felt like a knife twisting deeper into Lena's heart. She sat there, frozen, until she heard his key in the lock. Jake walked in, his suit slightly rumpled, wearing the same clothes from the photos. "Hey, babe," he called out casually, then stopped short when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" Lena held up her phone, her hand shaking. "Care to explain these?" The change in Jake's expression told her everything. No shock, no guilt, just mild annoyance, as if she'd caught him in a minor inconvenience, rather than destroying their future together. "Look," he sighed, loosening his tie. "This isn't how I wanted to do this, but maybe it's better this way." "Better?" Lena's voice cracked. "How long? Does it matter?" Jake's handsome face twisted into something ugly. "Let's be honest, Lena. You're not exactly what I'm looking for anymore. I need someone who fits better with my image." The words hit her like physical blows. Every insecurity she'd ever had about her curvy figure, every doubt she'd pushed aside, came rushing back. "Your image?" She stood up, anger finally breaking through the shock. "I loved you. I was going to marry you." Jake laughed, the sound cruel and dismissive. "Come on, Lena. Did you really think this would work? Look at you, and look at her." He shook his head. "I need someone who enhances my career, not someone who—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Lena watched him pack a bag, moving through their shared space like she wasn't even there. When he reached the door, he paused. "I'll send someone for the rest of my things," he said, then left without looking back. The slam of the door echoed through the empty apartment. Lena stood there, surrounded by the ruins of her life, feeling hollow and lost. Hours later, she found herself sitting at a trendy downtown bar, nursing a glass of wine. The place was dimly lit, full of beautiful people living their perfect lives. She'd put on her best dress, applied her makeup carefully to hide the tears, but inside she felt raw and exposed. She took another sip of wine, trying to drown out Jake's words, trying to forget how easily he'd thrown away their 3 years together. The ice clinked against her glass as she set it down, unaware that across the room a pair of dark eyes had already marked her as their target for the evening. The ice clinked against Lena's glass as she set it down, the sound hollow like her heart. 3 drinks in, and Jake's betrayal still burned raw in her chest. She traced the rim of her glass with her finger, trying to lose herself in the ambient noise of the bar. That's when the atmosphere shifted. The door opened, and the usual bar chatter dimmed. Lena felt it before she saw him, a presence that commanded attention without asking for it. She looked up, and her breath caught in her throat. A man stood in the doorway, tall and imposing in a perfectly tailored black suit. His dark eyes swept the room with the calculated precision of a predator, missing nothing. Power radiated from him like heat from a flame. He moved toward the bar with fluid grace, each step measured and deliberate. When he sat down next to her, Lena's skin prickled with awareness. He smelled of expensive cologne and danger. "Whiskey, neat," he ordered, his voice low and smooth like aged bourbon. Then, Without looking at her directly, he added, "And another of whatever the lady is having." "I'm fine," Lena protested weakly, but he cut her off with a slight shake of his head. "No one comes to a bar alone on a Tuesday night to be fine." His accent carried hints of Italy, rich and cultured. "I'm Vito." "Lena," she replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. They talked, and Lena found herself drawn into his orbit. He didn't try to impress her with shallow compliments or forced charm like Jake had. Instead, he listened, really listened, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. Hours slipped by like minutes. When Vito finally walked her to her car, the night air felt electric between them. He opened her door, and for a moment, stood close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Drive safely, Lena," he murmured, his breath warm against her ear. She drove home in a daze, her mind replaying every moment, every subtle touch, every loaded glance. That night, she dreamed of dark eyes and dangerous promises, never suspecting that the mysterious stranger who had captured her attention was the most feared man in the city, and that he had already decided she would be his. The city lights blurred through the taxi window as Lena's heart thundered in her chest. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was the crushing weight of Jake's betrayal, but something inside her had snapped. The memory of Vito's intense gaze at the bar burned through her thoughts, making her skin tingle with anticipation. The taxi pulled up to the elegant hotel he'd mentioned during their conversation. Lena paid the driver and stepped out, her legs shaking slightly. The doorman nodded as she entered the gleaming lobby, and she made her way to the elevators, punching the button for the top floor. Standing outside room 1501, Lena took a deep breath. Her hand trembled as she raised it to knock, but before her knuckles could touch the wood, the door swung open. Vito stood there, his dark eyes burning into hers. He'd loosened his tie, and the top buttons of his crisp white shirt were undone, revealing a glimpse of tanned skin underneath. Without a word, he reached out and pulled her inside, his grip firm but gentle. The door clicked shut behind them, and before Lena could think, his mouth was on hers. The kiss was demanding, hungry, sending waves of heat through her body. His hands tangled in her hair as he backed her against the wall, pressing his body against hers. "I knew you'd come," he murmured against her lips, his voice rough with desire. Lena gasped as his mouth traced a burning path down her neck. His touch was possessive, claiming, yet there was an underlying tenderness that made her melt into him. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the massive bed that dominated the room. Their clothes fell away piece by piece, and Vito's hands explored every curve of her body with reverent attention. Where Jake had made her feel ashamed of her fuller figure, Vito seemed to worship it. His touch was both rough and gentle, demanding and giving, until Lena lost herself completely in the sensations he created. Hours later, she lay beside him in the darkness, their breathing finally steady. The silk sheets felt cool against her flushed skin as reality slowly crept back in. What had she done? She'd just spent the night with a complete stranger, something she'd never done before. But as Vito's arm tightened around her waist, pulling her closer to his warm chest, Lena couldn't bring herself to regret it. His steady heartbeat against her back lulled her into a peaceful sleep, pushing away the questions that threatened to surface in her mind. What she didn't know was that this night would change everything. The stranger whose bed she now shared wasn't just any man. He was Vito Castellano, one of the most dangerous men in the city, and he had no intention of letting her go. Sunlight pierced through the hotel room's curtains, stabbing at Lena's closed eyes. Her head throbbed, a reminder of last night's drinks and decisions. She shifted beneath the luxurious sheets, and her eyes fluttered open to find Vito beside her, already awake and watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. His dark eyes traced every feature of her face, and Lena felt herself shrinking under his scrutiny. Before she could form words through her hangover haze, a phone rang, cutting through the morning silence. Vito reached for it, his movements fluid and precise. "Castellano," he answered, his voice transforming into something cold and razor-sharp. The warmth she'd glimpsed in his eyes vanished, replaced by a steely hardness that made her blood run cold. The realization hit her like a bucket of ice water. Castellano. Vito Castellano. The name Jake had whispered in fear during their arguments about his business dealings. The notorious Mafia boss who controlled half the city. She'd spent the night with a monster. Lena scrambled out of bed, fumbling for her clothes scattered across the floor. Her hands shook as she pulled on her dress from the night before. "Going somewhere?" Vito's voice was velvet-wrapped steel. He'd ended his call and was watching her panic with almost predatory amusement. "I should go," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let me drive you home." It wasn't a request. He smiled, but it was possessive. "Dangerous. I insist." The ride to her apartment was silent, thick with tension. Lena stared out the window of his sleek black car, trying to steady her racing heart. Every time she glanced at him, she saw two men, the gentle stranger from the bar and the feared Mafia boss, overlapping like a double exposure. When they pulled up to her building, Lena's hand trembled on the door handle. "Thank you for the ride," she said quickly, desperate to escape. Last night wasn't a mistake. She managed a weak nod and fled to her apartment, locking the door behind her. Her phone buzzed almost immediately with a text message. "I'll see you again soon, Lena." She slid down against the door, her legs giving out beneath her. The message glowed on her screen like a promise or a threat. Either way, she knew with bone-deep certainty that this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The phone's shrill ring pierced through Lena's morning haze. An unlisted number flashed across the screen, making her stomach clench. After last night's revelation about Vito's true identity, every unknown call felt like a potential threat. Her finger hovered over the screen before she finally answered. "Hello? Good morning, Lena." Vito's voice was smooth as aged whiskey, but there was steel beneath the surface. "I trust you slept well?" She gripped the phone tighter. "What do you want?" "Your safety has become my concern." His tone shifted, becoming harder. "Your ex-fiancé is making some unfortunate choices. He's been talking to people he shouldn't, saying things that could put you at risk." Lena's heart stuttered. "Jake? What are you talking about?" "Pack a bag," Vito commanded, ignoring her question. "You'll be staying at my estate until this situation is resolved. I can't just... This isn't a request. Dolcezza." His voice softened slightly, but the authority remained. "A car will arrive in 30 minutes." The line went dead before she could protest. Lena stared at her phone, her hands trembling. She knew she should refuse, should run in the opposite direction. But something in his voice, the hint of genuine concern beneath the command, made her hesitate. 30 minutes later, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside at her apartment. The driver, a stern-faced man in a dark suit, loaded her hastily packed bag into the trunk without a word. The drive to Vito's mansion felt surreal. They passed through iron gates that looked like they belonged in a medieval fortress, up a winding driveway lined with perfectly manicured hedges. The house itself was a modernist masterpiece of glass and stone, beautiful and intimidating just like its owner. Vito waited at the entrance, his broad shoulders filling out an impeccably tailored suit. His eyes raked over her as she approached, dark and hungry. "Welcome to your new home," he said, reaching for her hand. His touch sent electricity racing up her arm. "Temporary home," she corrected quickly. His lips curved into a predatory smile. "We'll see." Inside, Vito led her through the mansion, laying out his rules in that same uncompromising tone. "You'll stay in the guest house. My men will escort you if you need to leave the property." No phone calls without my knowledge. No visitors. I'm not your prisoner." Lena protested, even as something deep inside her thrilled at his possessiveness. Vito stopped, turning to face her. His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across her lower lip. "No," he agreed. "You're something far more precious." Later that night, Lena lay in the luxurious bed of the guest house, unable to sleep. The sheets were silk, the mattress perfect, but her mind wouldn't quiet. She could feel Vito's presence even from here, like a magnetic pull she couldn't resist. She hated this attraction, this weakness for a man who represented everything she should run from. Yet, as she stared at the shadowed ceiling, she couldn't deny the truth. She was already caught in his web. And some part of her didn't want to escape. The morning sun cast long shadows across the mansion's manicured gardens as Lena wandered between the rose bushes. Her fingers brushed against the velvet petals, their sweet scent doing little to calm her racing thoughts. Everything about this place screamed wealth and power, from the marble fountains to the perfectly trimmed hedges. It was beautiful, but it felt like a gilded cage. She felt him before she saw him. Vito stood at the garden's entrance, his dark suit a stark contrast to the blooming flowers around them. His presence made the air feel heavier, charged with an electricity that made her skin tingle. His eyes tracked her every movement, predatory and possessive. "You seem restless," he said, his voice carrying across the garden. Lena lifted her chin. "Maybe because I'm basically a prisoner here." A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he stepped closer. "A prisoner wouldn't have silk sheets and garden access. A cage is still a cage, no matter how pretty you make it." He moved faster than she expected, closing the distance between them in 3 long strides. His hand caught her chin, tilting her face up to his. "You're not in a cage, Lena. You're under my protection." Her heart hammered against her ribs. This close, she could smell his cologne, something expensive and masculine that made her thoughts scatter. "I never asked for your protection." "No," he agreed, his thumb brushing her bottom lip. "But you need it." Later that evening, sitting across from him at dinner, Lena felt like she was drowning in tension. The dining room was huge, all crystal chandeliers and dark wood, but it felt suffocating. Vito sat at the head of the table, his presence filling the room despite his silence. "Eat," he commanded, watching her push food around her plate. "I'm not hungry." His jaw tightened. "You haven't eaten all day. You've been watching me?" "I watch everything that's mine." The word mine sent a shiver down her spine. "I'm not yours." His dark eyes met hers across the table, and the world seemed to stop spinning. "Aren't you?" Back in her room that night, Lena paced the floor, her body humming with nervous energy. She could still feel the weight of his gaze, still hear the possessive note in his voice. It scared her how much she wanted to hear it again. She pressed her forehead against the cool window glass, staring out at the moonlit gardens. This man was dangerous. He was everything she should run from. So why did running feel like the last thing she wanted to do? The morning sun filtered through the curtains of the guest house, casting soft shadows across Lena's bed. A sharp knock jolted her awake. Her heart quickened as she pulled on her robe and opened the door to find Vito standing there, his imposing frame filling the doorway. He wore a perfectly tailored black suit that made his broad shoulders look even more intimidating. His face was a mask of cold authority, but his eyes held that dangerous intensity that made her pulse race. "We need to talk," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Come with me." Lena followed him through the mansion's marble halls, her bare feet silent against the polished floor. The weight of his presence pressed against her like a physical thing, making it hard to breathe. He led her into a study lined with dark wooden shelves and leather-bound books. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing to one of the leather chairs facing his desk. Lena perched on the edge of the seat, watching as he moved behind his desk with fluid grace. He remained standing, his hands pressed flat against the wood as he leaned forward slightly. "Your ex-fiancé has been making threats," he said, his voice cold and clinical. "He's become unstable." "Jake?" Lena's voice cracked. "But he is more dangerous than you realize." Vito cut her off, his jaw tightening. "He's been seen outside your apartment, making calls, asking questions about you." Lena's stomach dropped. "I don't understand. Why would he? Because men like him can't handle losing what they think belongs to them." Vito's eyes darkened. "But I'm going to handle it." "Handle it?" The words came out as a whisper. "What does that mean?" "It means you're going to stay here, where I can protect you." His voice was steel wrapped in silk. "This isn't up for discussion, Lena." She stood up, her hands shaking. "You can't just decide things for me. I'm not one of your possessions." Vito moved around the desk so quickly she barely had time to blink. He towered over her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. "No," he agreed, his voice dropping lower. "You're not a possession. You're something far more valuable." The air between them crackled with tension. Lena's breath caught in her throat as his eyes traced her face, lingering on her lips before snapping back to meet her gaze. "Things might get dangerous," he warned, stepping back. "But I will keep you safe, whether you like it or not." He turned and strode toward the door, each step purposeful and controlled. Lena watched him go, her heart hammering against her ribs. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to steady her breathing. The click of the door closing echoed in the quiet room, leaving her alone with the terrifying realization that she was falling deeper into Vito's world, and worse, part of her didn't want to escape. The chandeliers cast golden light across the dining room, their crystals throwing prisms onto the dark wood table where Vito's associates gathered. Lena sat rigid in her chair, hyper-aware of Vito's large hand resting possessively on her shoulder. The weight of it was both comforting and suffocating. Men in expensive suits filled the seats around them, their faces masks of careful respect when they looked at Vito. But when their eyes slid to Lena, she saw curiosity and calculation. She was an outsider here, and they all knew it. "More wine?" Vito's voice was soft beside her, but even that gentle question carried authority. She nodded, watching as dark red liquid splashed into her glass. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached for it, and Vito's fingers tightened on her shoulder in response. The dinner proceeded like a carefully choreographed dance. Conversations about business flowed around her, coded in ways she couldn't quite grasp. But she understood enough to know that these men answered to Vito, that his word was law. "The shipment wasn't what we agreed on," one of the men said, his tone slightly challenging. The room went deadly quiet. Vito's hand left her shoulder as he leaned forward. His movement was casual, but Lena felt the change in the air like the moment before a storm breaks. "Are you suggesting," Vito's voice was velvet over steel, "that I made a mistake?" The man's face went pale. "No, sir. I just—" "Choose your next words carefully," Vito interrupted. "They might be your last." Lena's heart hammered in her chest. The threat wasn't empty, she could feel it in her bones. The man stammered an apology, shrinking in his seat. Later, back in her room, Lena stared at her reflection. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with a mix of fear and something else she didn't want to name. The woman in the mirror looked different, somehow changed by the world she was being pulled into. She pressed her palms against the cool glass, trying to steady herself. But all she could think about was Vito's hand on her shoulder, his quiet power, the way he commanded the room. She was afraid of him, she should be afraid of him. But the pull she felt toward him was stronger than her fear, and that terrified her more than anything else. "What are you doing?" she whispered to her reflection. But the woman in the mirror had no answers, only questions that grew darker with each passing moment in Vito's world. Lena's phone buzzed against the polished mahogany desk in her guest room. Jake's name flashed across the screen. making her stomach drop. After a moment's hesitation, she answered, "What do you want? You think hiding behind that monster will save you?" Jake's voice dripped with venom. "I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of woman you really are. By the time I'm done, you'll have nothing left." Anger surged through her veins. Without thinking, she grabbed her car keys and headed for the door. She wasn't going to let him threaten her anymore. She made it halfway down the mansion's marble staircase before a strong hand gripped her arm. Vito's dark eyes blazed as he pulled her to a stop. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice was deadly quiet. Jake called, "He threatened me, and I'm going to—" "You're not going anywhere." His grip tightened. "You don't make the rules here. You're under my protection now. I can handle this myself." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Vito's laugh was cold. "Like you handled it before?" He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "Stay here. I'll deal with Jake myself." Before she could protest, he was gone, leaving her standing alone in the vast foyer. Hours passed as she paced the floors, waiting. When Vito finally returned, his knuckles were bruised, and there was a dangerous glint in his eyes. "It's done," he said simply. "Jake won't be bothering you again." Lena's heart raced. What did you do to him? What was necessary? He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her face. "No one threatens what's mine." She should have been terrified. She should have run. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, her body betraying her mind's protests. In that moment, she realized she was trapped, not just by Vito's power, but by her own growing need for him. Later that night, alone in her room, Lena stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was different, changed by the darkness she'd witnessed, yet somehow stronger for it. She was falling into Vito's world, and the scariest part wasn't that she couldn't escape. It was that she wasn't sure she wanted to. Days blurred together in Vito's mansion. Lena found herself caught in a dance of avoidance and attraction, trying to maintain distance even as her body betrayed her every impression. Time he entered a room. His presence filled every space, demanding attention without saying a word. She sat in the living room that evening, curled up on the leather sofa with a book she wasn't really reading. The mansion was quiet except for the tick of an antique clock. Her skin prickled with awareness before she heard his footsteps. Vito appeared in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He'd loosened his tie, and the top buttons of his shirt were undone. Even dressed down, he radiated power. "You're avoiding me," he said, his voice low and smooth like aged whiskey. Lena's heart jumped. "I'm not avoiding you. I just— Don't lie to me, Kara." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "I see how you tense when I'm near, how you hold your breath." She gripped her book tighter. "Maybe that's because you're dangerous." A dark smile curved his lips. "And yet you're still here." He sat beside her, close enough that his thigh pressed against hers. His hand came up, fingers brushing her cheek with surprising gentleness. Lena's breath caught in her throat. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, leaning in until his breath fanned across her lips. She should. She knew she should. But the words wouldn't come. His mouth captured hers, and the world tilted on its axis. The kiss was slow, deep, commanding. His tongue swept past her lips, claiming every inch of her mouth like he owned it, like he owned her. Heat pooled in her belly as his hands tangled in her hair, tilting her head back. A soft moan escaped her throat, and she felt his answering growl. When he finally pulled away, his dark eyes were burning with possession. "You're mine, Lena," he said against her lips. "The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." She fled to her room, her lips still tingling from his kiss. In the safety of darkness, she pressed her fingers to her mouth, remembering the feel of him, the way he tasted of danger and desire. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind replaying the kiss, over and over. She was falling into his web, strand by silken strand, and the scariest part was that she wasn't sure she wanted to escape anymore. The study was silent except for the soft clink of ice against crystal. Vito stood by the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. The setting sun cast long shadows across the room, turning everything blood red. Lena watched him from her place on the leather couch, her heart beating faster as she waited for him to speak. "My father died when I was 12, Vito said suddenly, his voice rough. "Right in front of me, shot 6 times by someone he trusted." He took a long drink, still facing the window. "That was my first lesson about power and betrayal." Lena's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't the cold, calculating Vito she knew. There was something raw in his voice, something that made her want to reach out to him. "After that, I learned quickly." He turned to face her, his dark eyes haunted. "Every bit of power I have, I've paid for in blood. Every person who's ever crossed me has learned that lesson the hard way." "Why are you telling me this?" Lena asked softly. Vito moved closer, towering over her. "Because you need to understand what kind of man I am." His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle despite his harsh words. "The things I've done, they'd make you run if you knew." But Lena didn't run. Instead, she leaned into his touch, surprising them both. "Maybe I'm tired of running." The tension in the room shifted, became something else entirely. Before either could speak, a sharp knock interrupted them. One of Vito's men burst in, speaking rapid Italian. Vito's face hardened instantly. The vulnerable moment shattered. He barked orders, his voice cold and lethal again. When the man left, Vito downed the rest of his whiskey in one gulp. His hands were shaking slightly, something Lena had never seen before. "Vito," she said softly, standing up. "Are you—" "Don't." He cut her off, but his voice cracked. "Don't try to fix me, Lena. I'm not something that can be fixed." She reached for him anyway, her fingers closing around his wrist. For a moment, just a moment, he let her hold him there, let her see past the armor he wore like a second skin. Then, just as quickly, he pulled away. The mask slipped back into place, and he was once again the untouchable Mafia boss. Without another word, he strode from the room, leaving Lena alone with the weight of everything he'd revealed. She sank back onto the couch, her mind spinning. She'd seen something in him tonight, something broken and human beneath all that power and control. And despite everything she knew about him, despite all the reasons she should be terrified, she wanted to see more. The setting sun had faded to darkness now, leaving her alone with dangerous thoughts about a dangerous man who was suddenly becoming far too important to her. The city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds against the dark canvas of night as Vito's sleek black car glided through the streets. Lena sat beside him, her curves wrapped in a midnight blue dress he'd chosen for her. Her heart fluttered each time his hand brushed her knee while shifting gears. "You look beautiful tonight," Vito said, his voice carrying that familiar mix of command and tenderness that made her shiver. The restaurant was exactly what she'd expected from someone like Vito, all crystal chandeliers and marble floors. As they were led to their table, Lena felt the weight of curious stares. She was used to being looked at, but not like this. Not as someone who belonged to Vito Castellano. "Ignore them," Vito murmured, his hand pressing against the small of her back. "They're nothing." For once, he seemed almost relaxed. His usual sharp edges had softened just enough to let her glimpse the man beneath the monster. He even laughed, a real laugh, when she told him about her childhood dream of becoming a circus performer. A circus performer? His eyes crinkled at the corners. "That's hard to picture." "Hey! I was 6!" Lena protested, feeling warm inside at his genuine amusement. Their moment of peace shattered when a man approached their table. He was tall, well-dressed, but his eyes were cold as they swept over Lena. Vito, the man nodded. This is new. Vito's expression hardened instantly. His hand found Lena's under the table, gripping it possessively. Marco, I didn't expect to see you here. Marco's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. And who might this lovely lady be? Before Lena could speak, Vito's voice cut through the air like steel. She's mine. His thumb stroked her palm even as his words sent chills down her spine. And she's not for you to concern yourself with. The threat in his voice was clear. Marco's face paled slightly, and he backed away with a quick nod. After he left, Vito pulled Lena closer, his lips brushing her ear. No one touches what's mine, he whispered. No one. Later that night, back in her room at the mansion, Lena stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her wasn't the same one who'd stumbled into that bar weeks ago, heartbroken and lost. This woman's eyes held secrets, power, and something else. Something that looked dangerously like falling in love with a monster. She touched the spot where Vito's lips had brushed her skin. How had she gotten here? How had she let herself be pulled so deep into his world that she couldn't imagine finding her way out? But the scariest part wasn't that she couldn't escape. The scariest part was that she didn't want to. As she climbed into bed, her phone buzzed with a message from Vito. Sweet dreams, cara mia. 3 simple words that told her everything she needed to know. She was his now, for better or worse. And God help her, she liked it. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Lena's phone buzzed in her hand, Jake's name flashing across the screen. Her stomach twisted as she opened his message. You think hiding behind that monster will save you? I'll destroy everything you have. Her hands shook as she read the words. Before she could process them, Vito's presence filled the doorway of the living room. His dark eyes fixed on her trembling fingers, his jaw tightening. You're not leaving the mansion, he said, his voice hard as steel. Not until this is handled. Something inside, Lena snapped. Days of being controlled, watched, and protected had worn her down. She stood up, squaring her shoulders. I'm not some porcelain doll you can lock away, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. I won't let Jake or anyone else make me hide. Vito's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping inches from her. You don't understand what men like him are capable of. And you don't understand that I'm not weak. Lena shot back. I don't need a keeper. His hand came up, fingers grazing her cheek. The touch was gentle, at odds with the dangerous gleam in his eyes. No, you're not weak. But you are mine to protect. Later that evening, Vito had dinner set up in his private study. Candles flickered across the mahogany table, casting warm light on the spread of food. Lena sat across from him, the tension from earlier still hanging between them. My father was killed when I was 12, Vito said suddenly, breaking the silence. His fingers tightened around his wine glass. I learned then that power is the only way to keep what matters safe. Lena's breath caught at the raw pain in his voice. For the first time, she saw past his cold exterior to the wounded man beneath. Is that why you keep such tight control? She asked softly. His dark eyes met hers. Everything I love becomes a target. Every person I care about becomes a weakness others can exploit. The weight of his words settled over them. When dinner ended, Vito stood and moved toward her. Before she could step back, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her against his chest. His lips pressed against her forehead, warm and surprisingly tender. Lena tried to pull away, conflicted by the softness of this dangerous man. His arms tightened, holding her in place. You're mine, Lena, he whispered against her skin, his voice rough with emotion. You will always be mine. She closed her eyes, feeling the truth of his words settle into her bones. In his arms, she felt both trapped and protected, afraid and safe. It was a contradiction that defined everything about their relationship, and she was starting to realize there was no escaping it, or him. The morning sun crept through the curtains, painting shadows across Lena's bed. Her eyes fluttered open to find Vito sitting at the foot of her bed, still as a statue. His presence filled the room like smoke, dark and suffocating. "You're watching me sleep now?" she asked, pulling the covers tighter around herself. His jaw tightened. "Things are getting worse with Jake." The mention of her ex sent a chill down her spine. Vito's eyes, usually cold and distant, held something else today: worry, perhaps even fear. "I can handle Jake," Lena said, but her voice wavered. "No." Vito's tone cut through the air like a blade. "You stay by my side from now on. This isn't a request." Later that day, Vito took her to a meeting with a rival family. The restaurant was fancy, but the atmosphere was thick with tension. Lena sat beside him, watching as he transformed into something darker, more dangerous. His words were careful, measured, but carried threats beneath their surface. "Your territory stops at 5th Street, Vito said, his voice like ice. "Cross that line again, and there will be consequences." The rival boss, a man with cold eyes and a crooked smile, laughed. "Are you going soft, Castellano? Bringing your woman to business meetings now?" Everything happened fast after that. Glass shattered. Screams erupted. Vito moved with deadly grace, his fists connecting with bone and flesh. Blood sprayed across the white tablecloth. Through it all, he kept Lena behind him, shielding her with his body. Back at the mansion, Lena's hands wouldn't stop shaking. Vito found her in the library, staring out the window. He approached slowly, like you would a scared animal. "That's your world?" she whispered. "Violence and blood?" His fingers brushed her cheek, gentle despite the bruises on his knuckles. "My world is protecting what's mine," he said softly. "You don't understand this life, but I swear to you, Lena, no one will ever hurt you again." She looked up at him, seeing both the monster and the man. His touch was tender, but she'd watched him break a man's jaw hours ago. The contrast should have terrified her, but instead, it made her heart race. "How can I trust you?" she asked. His eyes darkened. "Because everything I do, every life I take, every deal I make, it's all to keep you safe now." Lena knew she should run, but as she stood there, caught in his gaze, she realized she was already his. The thought terrified her, but not as much as the idea of walking away from him. The library's silence pressed against Lena's ears as she stared unseeing at the leather-bound book in her lap. Afternoon sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across Persian rugs and mahogany shelves. She'd been trying to read for hours, but her mind kept drifting to Vito, to the way his presence seemed to fill every corner of the mansion and her thoughts. Her fingers traced the book's spine absently. She wasn't a prisoner here. Not really. The doors weren't locked. No guards blocked her path. Yet something stronger than iron bars kept her within these walls, a pull toward the dangerous man who'd claimed her life as his own. The door opened with a soft click. Vito's footsteps were nearly silent on the thick carpet. But Lena felt him enter the room. The air, changed when he was near, became heavier, charged with an electricity that made her skin prickle. "You're troubled." His voice was low, controlled. He stood before her, hands in the pockets of his tailored black slacks. Lena closed the book, finally meeting his dark gaze. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words barely above a whisper. "Of me?" There was an edge to his question. "No." She shook her head. "Of this world. Your world. The violence, the darkness. I don't know if I can be part of it." Vito's jaw tightened. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the quiet room. "You don't have to be." His words were careful, measured. "The door is open, Lena. You can walk away if you dare. The choice hung between them like a blade. Later that evening, Lena stood at the window of her room, watching city lights flicker to life in the growing darkness. The decision weighed on her heart, but deep down, she already knew the truth. She couldn't leave. Not now. Not when every fiber of her being craved his presence, even as her mind screamed at the danger. She sensed him before she heard him. Turning from the window, she found Vito in the doorway, his broad frame filling the space. His eyes, usually hard and calculating, held something softer as they met hers. Without a word, he crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. This time, Lena didn't fight it. She melted against him, breathing in his scent of expensive cologne and power. His grip was possessive, protective, everything she'd been running from, and everything she now knew she needed. "Mine," he whispered against her hair, and Lena closed her eyes, accepting the truth of that single word. She was his, caught in his dangerous web, and she no longer wanted to escape. The morning sun cast long shadows across the winding driveway as Vito's black SUV approached the countryside estate. Lena pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the iron gates swing open. The sprawling property looked like something from a fairy tale, if fairy tales had armed guards patrolling the perimeter. "You'll be safer here," Vito said, his voice low and controlled. His hand rested possessively on her thigh, a gesture that both thrilled and terrified her. The mansion loomed before them, all stone and Gothic architecture. Lena felt the weight of isolation settling over her as Vito led her inside, his hand pressed against the small of her back. The interior was luxurious but cold, much like the man beside her. "This is temporary," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "Until I handle the situation with your ex." Lena nodded, knowing better than to argue. She'd learned that much about him in the past few weeks. Throughout the afternoon, she watched from a second-floor window as Vito trained with his men in the courtyard below. His movements were precise, lethal, a dance of violence that made her breath catch. Without his suit jacket, the muscles in his back rippled beneath his shirt as he demonstrated a particular hold that could snap a man's neck. He was beautiful in his deadliness. Later, as the sun began to set, Vito found her in the library. He'd showered, his dark hair still damp, but the dangerous energy still radiated from him. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handling the crystal with surprising gentleness. "My father was killed in a room like this," he said suddenly, his voice rough. "I was 10. They made me watch." Lena's heart clenched. "Vito!" "That's when I learned that power is the only thing that keeps you alive in this world." He took a long drink, his eyes distant. "And the only way to protect what's yours." The possessiveness in his voice made her shiver. She understood now his coldness was armor, forged in blood and pain. As night fell, Vito led her to a balcony overlooking the estate's gardens. The moon hung low and full, casting everything in silver light. His hand found her waist, pulling her close. "No one will touch you here," he murmured, against her hair. "You're safe." But it was the tremor in his voice that undid her, the smallest crack in his perfect control. When he turned her to face him, his eyes held something she'd never seen before: vulnerability. His kiss, when it came, was different from the others, less demanding, more questioning. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious, something worth protecting. And there, under the moonlight, Lena realized she was falling for him, not the Mafia boss who terrorized the city, but the wounded man who held her like she could save him from his demons. It was the most dangerous thing she'd ever done. The estate's silence pressed in around Lena as she paced the length of her room. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the choices that loomed before her. Through the window, she could see Vito's men patrolling the grounds, a constant reminder of the dangerous world she'd stumbled into. Her fingers traced the cool glass remembering how different her life had been just weeks ago. Before Jake's betrayal, before Vito, now everything had changed, and she wasn't sure if she was a prisoner or a willing participant in this new reality. Planning your escape route? Vito's voice cut through her thoughts. She hadn't heard him enter, but there he was, leaning against the doorframe. His dark suit was impeccable as always, but there was something different in his eyes tonight, a flash of vulnerability beneath the steel. "I'm not planning anything," Lena said, hating how her voice trembled. He crossed the room in long strides, stopping just inches from her. His presence was overwhelming, filling every corner of the space with unspoken tension. "Don't lie to me, Kara. I can see it in your eyes." "What do you want from me, Vito?" The words burst from her before she could stop them. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheek. The gesture was gentle, but his grip was firm. "What I want? The question is, what do you want?" "I—" Lena started, but he cut her off. "You're free to leave," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But understand this, once you walk away, there's no coming back. This world, my world, it changes people. You'll never be the same." The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She was already changed, marked by his presence in ways she couldn't explain. The thought of leaving made her chest ache. "I don't know if I can stay," she whispered. "And I don't know if I can let you go." His admission hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Morning came too quickly, finding Lena still torn between staying and fleeing. She stood by the window again, watching the sun rise over the estate's grounds. Behind her, she heard Vito enter the room, his footsteps deliberately loud this time. Their eyes met in the window's reflection. The tension crackled between them, electric and undeniable. In that moment, Lena knew she could no more leave this man than she could stop breathing. She was his. Had been since that first night at the bar, even if she wasn't ready to admit it. Vito's reflection showed the ghost of a smile, as if he could read her thoughts. He didn't need to say anything. They both knew she would stay, not because he forced her, but because something stronger than fear kept her tethered to him. The choice had been made long before she realized there was one to make. The morning sun filtered through the estate's heavy curtains, casting long shadows across Lena's face as she stood in Vito's study. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched him pace, his muscular frame taut with tension. "If you stay," Vito said, his voice low and dangerous, "there's no going back. My enemies will become yours." He stopped in front of her, dark eyes boring into hers. "They'll use you to get to me." Lena swallowed hard, but lifted her chin. "I understand." "No." His hand shot out, gripping her chin. "You don't. Not yet." His thumb traced her lower lip, the gesture both tender and possessive. "These men, they'll destroy anything beautiful just to hurt me." The weight of his words settled over her like a heavy cloak. This wasn't just about them anymore. This was about survival in a world where mercy didn't exist. "There's movement at the border," one of Vito's men interrupted, appearing at the doorway. "They're getting closer." Vito's jaw clenched. "Get the cars ready." He turned to Lena, his expression hardening. "You'll stay here where it's safe." "No." The word escaped before she could stop it. His eyes narrowed dangerously. "What did you say?" "I won't hide while you're out there." Lena stepped closer, her heart racing. "I'm already part of this. Let me face it with you." For a long moment, Vito just stared at her. Then, without warning, he grabbed her, pulling her against his chest. His kiss was brutal, marking her as his. "If anything happens to you?" His voice was rough against her lips. "It won't," she whispered back. He pulled away, his eyes dark with promise and possession. "You're mine now, Lena. Whatever happens out there, remember that." His fingers tangled in her hair. "You belong to me." As she looked up at him, Lena felt the last threads of her old life slip away. There was no turning back now. She'd chosen this, chosen him, and all the danger that came with it. The sound of car engines rumbled outside. It was time. Vito's hand found hers, squeezing it once. "Stay close to me," he commanded. Lena nodded, following him toward the door. She'd made her choice, and now she had to live with it. But as she watched Vito's powerful frame move ahead of her, she knew that despite the danger, despite the darkness, she was exactly where she wanted to be. She belonged to him now, for better or worse, and somehow that thought wasn't as frightening as it should have been. Chapter 19. A Taste of Power. The black SUV glided through the iron gates of the Brecons. Mancini Estate, its tinted windows reflecting the afternoon sun. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs as she sat beside Vito, his presence both comforting and terrifying. He hadn't spoken a word since they'd left his mansion, but his jaw was set in a hard line that told her everything she needed to know about what lay ahead. Vito's voice was low, barely above a whisper. "Don't speak unless spoken to. These men—" He paused, his dark eyes finding hers. "They're not like me." Lena nodded, her throat too dry for words. The SUV came to a stop in front of a massive Italian villa. Men in black suits lined the entrance, their hands hovering near concealed weapons. Vito's fingers brushed against her lower back as they walked up the marble steps. The touch was possessive, a clear message to everyone watching: she belonged to him. Inside, the air felt thick with tension. Crystal chandeliers cast shadows across faces that seemed carved from stone, each pair of eyes following their movement through the grand foyer. Salvatore Mancini waited in his study, a room that reeked of expensive cigars and old money. He was older than Vito, with silver threading through his dark hair and cruel lines etched around his mouth. His smile didn't reach his eyes as he stood to greet them. "Castellano?" he said, his accent heavy. "And who is this lovely creature?" Vito's hand tightened on Lena's waist. "She's mine," he said simply, the words carrying a weight that made the room temperature drop several degrees. The negotiations started peacefully enough. Territory disputes, shipping routes, protection money. But Lena could feel the undercurrent of violence in every word, every gesture. She watched Vito transform before her eyes, his usual coldness hardening into something deadly. When Mancini made a thinly veiled threat about accidents happening to beautiful women, Vito's response was immediate. In one fluid motion, he had Mancini pinned against his own desk, a blade pressed to his throat. "Threaten her again." Vito's voice was eerily calm. "And I'll paint these walls with your blood." The drive home was silent. Lena's hands trembled in her lap as she processed everything she'd witnessed. The casual violence, the power plays, the constant threat of death. This was Vito's world. And now, it was hers too. Vito finally spoke, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "Yes," Lena admitted. He reached over and took her hand, his grip firm but gentle. "Good. Fear keeps you alive in this world." He paused, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "But remember something, Lena. Everything I am, everything I have, it's all to protect what's mine. And you." His eyes met hers, dark and intense. "You are mine." Lena felt the words settle into her bones. There was no going back now. She was bound to this dangerous man, to his violent world, by something stronger than fear, something that felt dangerously close to love. The morning sun cast long shadows across Lena's bedroom floor as she traced her fingers over the fresh bruise on her arm, a stark reminder of yesterday's attack. She couldn't shake the image of the black SUV that had nearly run her down, or the masked men who'd emerged from it. If it hadn't been for Vito's quick-thinking guards, a knock at her door made her jump. "Come in," she called, her voice shakier than she'd intended. Vito filled the doorframe, his tall frame blocking out the hallway light. His dark eyes settled on her bruise, and something dangerous flickered across his face. "How are you feeling?" His voice was controlled, but Lena could hear the underlying tension. "I'm fine," she lied, pulling her sleeve down to cover the bruise. Vito crossed the room in 3 long strides, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. Without warning, he gripped her arm, pushing up her sleeve to examine the injury. His touch was gentle, but his jaw clenched tight. "This shouldn't have happened," he growled. "You shouldn't have been alone." Lena tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. "I can't live like a prisoner, Vito. I need—" "What you need," he cut her off, "is to understand that this isn't a game." His fingers traced the bruise, sending shivers down her spine. "The Mancinis won't stop until they hurt me. And you, cara mia, are the easiest way to do that." "I didn't ask for any of this," Lena whispered, but even as the words left her mouth, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She'd chosen to stay. Vito's dark eyes met hers, and the intensity in them made her breath catch. "No, you didn't. But here you are." His hand moved from her arm to cup her face. "And I won't let anyone take what's mine." The possessiveness in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, it sent heat coursing through her body. She was falling deeper into his world with every passing moment, and the scariest part was that she wasn't sure she wanted to stop. "I can't live in a cage," she whispered. "Then learn to live with the danger," he replied, his thumb brushing her lower lip. "Because I'm not letting you go, Lena. Not now, not ever." His words hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and threat. Lena knew she should run, should fight against this possession. But as Vito's lips claimed hers in a fierce kiss, she realized she was already lost to him, to his world, to his darkness, to everything he represented. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were dark with possession. "Get dressed," he ordered softly. "You don't leave my sight today." As he strode from the room, Lena touched her lips, still burning from his kiss. She was trapped in a gilded cage of his making, but the bars were starting to feel less like a prison and more like protection. And that, perhaps, was the most dangerous thing of all. The soft click of the door echoed through Lena's room as Vito entered. For once, he wasn't wearing his usual tailored suit, just a simple black shirt and pants. The change made him look almost human, less like the ruthless Mafia boss she'd come to know. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice lacking its usual sharp edge. Lena shook her head, watching as he crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed. The mattress dipped under his weight, and she caught a whiff of his cologne, expensive and masculine, just like everything else about him. "I want to tell you something," he said, staring straight ahead, his jaw clenched and unclenched, betraying an inner struggle she'd never seen before. "About why I am the way I am." Lena's breath caught in her throat. She'd never seen him like this, vulnerable, almost soft around the edges. "My father was killed when I was 12, he began, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Right in front of me. Our own people betrayed him, people he trusted." His hands balled into fists. "That day, I learned that trust is a weakness. Love is a weakness." Lena's heart ached as she watched the pain flicker across his face. She reached out, hesitating for a moment before placing her hand over his clenched fist. To her surprise, he didn't pull away. "After that, I had to become hard, cold." He turned to look at her, his dark eyes intense. "It was the only way to survive, to protect what was mine." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Lena could feel the weight of his confession, understanding for the first time why he kept everyone at arm's length. "But you," he continued, his voice rough with emotion, "you make me want things I can't have, feel things I shouldn't feel." He stood abruptly, moving toward the door. But before he left, he turned back to her. The moonlight streaming through the window cast shadows across his face, making him look both dangerous and desperately vulnerable. "I never wanted this life for you, Lena. But you're mine now, and I'll protect you, no matter what." The door closed behind him, leaving Lena alone with her racing thoughts. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart pound beneath her palm. She was falling for him, the monster and the man, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. She lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. His words echoed in her mind, "You're mine now." She should have been frightened, should have wanted to run. Instead, she felt a warmth spread through her chest, because for the first time she understood being his wasn't just about possession. It was about protection, about belonging, and maybe, just maybe, it was about love, too. Chapter 22. The Traitor. The papers scattered across Vito's desk told a story that made Lena's blood run cold. Her hands trembled as she pieced together the evidence: bank statements, encrypted messages, and photographs. Francesco, Vito's trusted advisor, had been feeding information to their rivals for months. She hadn't meant to snoop, but when she'd noticed the documents while bringing Vito his evening coffee, the familiar name caught her eye. Now, standing in his study with the proof of betrayal laid bare before her, she felt sick. "Find something interesting?" Vito's voice cut through the silence. Lena spun around to find him standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Francesco," she managed. "He's been—" "I know." Vito's voice was eerily calm as he crossed the room. He picked up one of the photographs, studying it with cold detachment. "I've known for weeks. Why haven't you done anything?" The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Vito's dark eyes met hers. "Because, Kara, sometimes you need to let the snake think it's hidden before you strike." A chill ran down Lena's spine. She'd seen Vito's ruthless side before, but there was something different about this. Something calculated and deadly that made her remember exactly who and what he was. "He'll be here tonight," Vito continued, setting the photograph down, "and then we'll deal with his indiscretion later." That evening, Lena huddled in her room, trying to block out the sounds echoing through the mansion. Francesco's pleas cut short. The dull thud of violence, Vito's voice, cold and commanding. When it was over, Vito came to her. Blood stained his white shirt, and his knuckles were raw. He looked at her with those dark, unfathomable eyes. "No one betrays me, Lena," he said softly, reaching out to touch her cheek. "Not even you." She should have been repulsed, should have run. Instead, she leaned into his touch, feeling the familiar pull of desire mixed with fear. This was his world. Brutal, unforgiving, and now, irrevocably, hers too. "I understand," she whispered, and she did. In Vito's world, loyalty was everything, and despite herself, despite the violence and darkness, she knew she'd already given him hers completely. His thumb brushed across her lower lip, leaving a promise of both tenderness and possession. "Good girl," he murmured, before turning to leave. Lena watched him go, knowing that tonight had changed everything. She'd seen the full extent of what Vito was capable of, and still, she couldn't walk away. She was bound to him now, to his darkness and his protection, to his violence and his love. The mansion felt different after Francesco's betrayal. The usual bustle of activity had been replaced by an eerie stillness that seemed to echo through every corridor. Lena stood at her bedroom window, watching the sun set behind the iron gates. The events of the past few weeks played through her mind like a dark movie she couldn't pause. Her hands trembled as she remembered the sounds from that night, the muffled violence, Vito's cold commands. Yet here she was, still standing, still breathing, still feeling the magnetic pull toward the man who'd turned her world upside down. A soft knock at her door made her jump. Vito stood in the doorway, his broad frame filling the space. His dark eyes studied her face, and something in his expression softened. "Pack a bag," he said, his voice gentler than usual. "We're leaving for a few days." Lena's heart skipped. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere quiet." He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the small room. "You need time away from all this." 2 hours later, they were driving along a coastal road, the ocean stretching endlessly beside them. Vito's beach house was isolated, perched on a cliff overlooking the water. It was smaller than the mansion, but no less luxurious. As evening fell, they sat on the deck, the sound of waves replacing the usual tension-filled silence. Vito watched her, his usual hardness melting away in the fading light. "You're different here," Lena said softly. His lips curved slightly. "So are you." The weekend passed in a blur of quiet moments. They walked on the beach, ate meals without the weight of business hanging over them. And for the first time, Lena saw glimpses of the man beneath the Mafia boss exterior. On their last night, they stood on the balcony, watching the moonlight dance on the waves. Vito's arms wrapped around her from behind, his chest warm against her back. "I know this life isn't what you wanted," he murmured against her ear. "But you've become part of my world, Lena. Part of me." She turned in his arms, meeting his intense gaze. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheek with unexpected tenderness. "You're mine," he whispered. The words different now, less a threat, more a promise. "And I'll never let you go." As his lips met hers, gentle yet demanding, Lena knew there was no going back. Her heart, her life, everything she was, it all belonged to him now. In this dangerous, beautiful world he'd pulled her into, she'd finally found where she belonged. The ocean waves crashed below, a constant reminder of the power and danger that defined their world. But here, in this moment, wrapped in Vito's arms, Lena felt something she never expected to find in his dark world peace. The morning air was thick with tension as Vito's black SUV pulled into the mansion's driveway. The peaceful weekend at the beach house felt like a distant dream now, shattered by the grim news that awaited them. Marco, Vito's most trusted lieutenant, stood at the entrance, his face etched with concern. "Boss," Marco said, his voice low and urgent. "Mancini's making moves. They're planning something big." Lena watched as Vito's expression hardened, the tender man from their weekend retreat vanishing beneath the cold mask of the Mafia boss. His jaw tightened, and his eyes turned to ice as he absorbed the news. "Get everyone in the main room. Now." Vito's command was sharp, leaving no room for question. Inside, the mansion buzzed with activity. Men in dark suits moved with purpose, their faces grim. Lena felt like an outsider again, watching as Vito transformed before her eyes. He stood at the head of the long table, his presence commanding absolute attention. "Mancini thinks he can take what's mine." Vito's voice cut through the room like a blade. "He's about to learn how wrong he is." Lena's heart raced as she watched him. This was the man she'd fallen for, dangerous, powerful, and utterly unstoppable. The way he controlled the room, the way his men hung on his every word, it was terrifying and fascinating all at once. As the day wore on, Lena tried to keep her distance, to give herself space to think. But every time she pulled away, Vito was there, his dark eyes following her, his presence impossible to ignore. In quiet moments between strategy meetings, he'd find her, his touch possessive, his kisses fierce. "You're thinking of running," he said during one such moment, his voice low against her ear. "Don't." "I'm not running," Lena whispered back, even as her heart pounded. "I just—" "This is all so much, Vito." His grip on her waist tightened. "This is who I am, Lena. This world, this life, it's part of me, and you're part of me now, too." The truth of his words hit her hard. She was in love with him, all of him. The tender man who held her at night, and the ruthless boss who commanded an empire. There was no separating the two. As night fell, the mansion transformed into a fortress. Armed men patrolled the grounds, and tension crackled in the air. Vito stood by the window in his office, his silhouette dark against the fading light. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said as Lena approached, "remember this. Everything I do to protect what's mine. And you, Lena." He turned to face her, his eyes burning with intensity. "You are mine." He pulled her into a kiss that felt like a claim, like a promise, like a warning. Lena melted into it, knowing that tomorrow would bring violence and chaos. But tonight she belonged to him completely. When they finally broke apart, Vito's expression was fierce. "Stay close to me tomorrow, no matter what happens." Lena nodded, her heart racing. She was all in now, for better or worse. Whatever storm was coming, they would face it together. The mansion erupted into organized chaos as Vito's men moved with military precision, securing entrances and establishing defensive positions. Lena watched from behind the thick oak door of her secured room, her heart thundering against her ribs. The air was thick with tension, and every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat. Through the crack in the door, she observed Vito commanding his men. He stood tall in his black suit, his presence radiating cold authority. His voice was steady as he issued orders, but Lena could see the dangerous glint in his dark eyes. This wasn't just about territory or power anymore, this was personal. "Boss, Mancini's men have been spotted at the south gate," one of his lieutenants reported. Vito's jaw tightened. "Double the security. No one gets through." He turned suddenly, catching Lena's eye through the door's gap. Without a word, he crossed the hallway in long strides and entered her room, closing the door behind him. "You should be." Away from the door, he said, his voice softer now but still carrying that edge of steel. "I can't just hide while everything falls apart," Lena whispered, her hands trembling slightly. Vito's expression remained hard, but his touch was gentle as he cupped her face. "This isn't your fight. It became my fight the moment I chose to stay with you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips before vanishing. "You're more dangerous than any weapon, Kara. You make me weak." Before Lena could respond, an explosion rocked the mansion's foundations. Vito's body instantly covered hers, shielding her from the shower of plaster that rained down from the ceiling. The distant sound of gunfire echoed through the halls. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Marco and Giovanni will guard you. If anything happens." He pressed a quick, fierce kiss to her lips. "Remember what I taught you." Lena gripped his sleeve. "Vito, I'll come back for you," he promised, his eyes burning with intensity. "You're mine, Lena. Nothing changes that." He pulled away, and Lena felt the loss of his warmth immediately. She watched as he strode out, barking orders in rapid Italian to his men. The sounds of combat grew louder, and her heart clenched with each distant explosion. Through the window, she could see the night falling over the mansion grounds, bringing with it shadows that could hide any number of enemies. The thought that this might be the last time she saw Vito alive clawed at her chest. She touched her lips where he had kissed her, tasting the promise of his return. The war had begun, and there would be no turning back now. The morning sun filtered through the mansion's bullet-riddled windows, casting broken shadows across the marble floors. Lena stepped carefully over scattered glass, her heart heavy as she watched Vito's men tend to their wounded comrades. The air still smelled of gunpowder and blood. She paused near the kitchen, voices drifting through the partially open door. Two of Vito's most trusted men were speaking in hushed tones. "Antonio's been feeding information to the Mancinis for months," one whispered. "Everything, security rotations, shipment schedules, even Lena's whereabouts." Her blood ran cold. Antonio had been at Vito's right hand since before she arrived. He'd eaten at their table, shared their confidences. When she found Vito in his study, he was standing by the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. "I know about Antonio," she said, her voice trembling. He didn't turn around. "I've known for weeks." "Then why?" "Because sometimes—" He cut her off, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You need to let a snake think it's hidden before you strike." Lena wrapped her arms around herself. "We can't trust anyone." Finally, Vito turned. His dark eyes were cold, calculating. "Trust isn't necessary when fear does the job better." He moved toward her with predatory grace. "The traitor will be dealt with, permanently." Later that afternoon, Lena watched from behind a curtain as Antonio was led into Vito's private office. The conversation was brief, punctuated by a single gunshot that made her flinch. When Vito emerged, his expression was blank, but his eyes held a satisfaction that chilled her to the bone. He found her in the library, his hands clean but his soul stained darker. "No one else will ever betray us," he said softly, touching her cheek. "I'll make sure of it." Lena leaned into his touch, torn between horror at his actions and a fierce pride in his protection. This was the man she'd chosen, ruthless, dangerous, and utterly devoted. The price of his love was written in blood, and she was beginning to accept that she'd willingly pay it. The weight of Vito's world pressed down on Lena's shoulders as she stood at the mansion's window, watching rain streak across the glass. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every unexpected sound made her heart race. Her feelings for Vito had grown deeper with each passing day, but so had the gnawing fear that ate at her peace. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to stop the trembling that seemed constant these days. The sound of gunfire from last week's attack still echoed in her mind. How many more battles would there be? How many more lives would be lost in this endless war? Behind her, Vito's presence filled the room before he even spoke. "You're thinking too much," he said, his voice low and controlled. She turned to face him, taking in his pristine suit and the darkness in his eyes. "How can I not?" Instead of answering, he crossed the room and took her hand. "Come with me." An hour later, they sat at a secluded waterfront restaurant, the city lights twinkling across the harbor. Here, away from the mansion's suffocating walls, Lena could almost pretend they were normal. Almost. "Talk to me," Vito said, his fingers brushing hers across the table. "I see the fear in your eyes." Lena's throat tightened. "I'm scared, Vito. Not of you, but of this life, the violence, the constant threat." She swallowed hard. "I don't know how much more I can take." His jaw clenched, but his touch remained gentle. "This won't last forever. Once I deal with the Mancinis, things will be different." He lifted her hand to his lips. "I'll keep you safe, Lena, whatever it takes." For a moment, surrounded by candlelight and the sound of waves, she believed him. She let herself sink into the warmth of his promise, into the tenderness he showed only to her. But as they returned to the mansion, reality crashed back like a cold wave. Vito's entire demeanor shifted the moment they crossed the threshold. His shoulders straightened, his eyes hardened, and the tender lover became the ruthless Mafia boss once more. Lena watched him walk away to take a call, his voice turning to ice as he discussed business with his men. Her heart ached with the contradiction of it all, loving a man who could be so gentle with her, yet so brutal with others. She was drowning in his world, and she wasn't sure if his love would be enough to keep her afloat. As she climbed the stairs to her room, she could feel his eyes following her. Even now, after everything, he was watching, protecting, possessing. She was his person. They both knew it. But as she closed her door and sank onto her bed, she wondered if loving him was worth the price of living in his darkness. The sounds of the mansion at night surrounded her, footsteps in the hallway, hushed voices discussing strategy, the occasional echo of a car arriving with news from the streets. This was her life now, wrapped in luxury and danger, loved by a man who dealt in death, and despite every rational thought screaming at her to run, she knew she would stay. Because even in the darkness, Vito's love burned brighter than her fear. Following the tense days of betrayal and violence, the morning dawned with an eerie calm over Vito's mansion. Lena stood by the window of her room, watching as Vito's men moved with practiced precision across the grounds. The air was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew the final confrontation with the Mancinis was coming. Vito found her there, his reflection appearing beside hers in the glass. His presence, as always, filled the room with an intensity that made her breath catch. "It ends today," he said, his voice carrying that familiar edge of steel. "The Mancinis won't survive what's coming." Lena turned to face him, studying the hard lines of his face. "And then what?" "Then you'll be safe." His eyes softened slightly as they met hers. "We'll be safe." Throughout the day, they tried to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Vito took her for a walk in the mansion's gardens, where roses bloomed against stone walls that had witnessed generations of violence. His hand rested possessively on the small of her back as they walked, and for a moment Lena could almost pretend they were just a normal couple. "I want to build something different," Vito said suddenly, stopping beside a marble fountain. "Something better than what my father left behind." His words carried weight, hope mixed with determination. Lena reached for his hand, feeling the roughness of his fingers against hers. "Is that even possible in this world?" Before he could answer, one of his men approached quickly. "Boss, we've got movement from the Mancinis." The spell broke. Vito's expression hardened instantly, his jaw tightening as he absorbed the news. The tender moment vanished, replaced by the cold calculation of a man preparing for war. As evening approached, Vito led Lena back inside. The mansion hummed with activity, men checking weapons, discussing strategies, preparing for the bloodshed to come. Before leaving to meet with his captains, Vito pulled Lena close. His lips brushed her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "You're mine, Lena," he whispered, his voice both a promise and a warning. "Always." She watched him walk away, his shoulders set with determination. The words hung in the air between them, and Lena knew that after tonight, nothing would ever be the same. She was bound to this man, to his world of shadows and violence, for better or worse. The tension in the mansion was suffocating. Lena paced the secure room where Vito had insisted she stay, her heart pounding with each distant gunshot. The battle with the Mancinis had begun, and she could feel the vibrations of explosions through the walls. Through a small window, she caught glimpses of Vito's men moving with military precision across the grounds. Vito himself stood like a dark sentinel, his black suit pristine despite the chaos, barking orders in that cold, commanding voice that sent shivers down her spine. A particularly loud explosion rocked the mansion. Lena steadied herself against the wall, her fingers trembling. This wasn't just another skirmish. This was the final battle for control of the city. Hours passed like years. The gunfire grew closer, more intense. Lena could hear shouting in Italian, the sound of breaking glass, the thud of bodies. She pressed herself into a corner, praying that Vito was still alive. Then everything went quiet. The silence was worse than the noise. Lena held her breath, straining to hear anything that would tell her what was happening. The door to her room suddenly burst open, and she nearly screamed, but it was Vito. He stood in the doorway, his suit spattered with blood, his eyes wild with an intensity she'd never seen before. Without a word, he crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "It's done," he whispered against her hair. "The Mancinis are finished." Lena clutched at his jacket, breathing in his scent mixed with gunpowder and blood. "Vito." He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. "I did this for us, Lena. Everything I've done, the violence, the death, it was all to keep you safe, to give us a future." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was so scared." "Never again," he promised, his voice rough with emotion. "No one will ever threaten what's mine again. You're safe now, Lena. You're mine, and I'm never letting you go." His lips crashed into hers, desperate and possessive. In that moment, Lena knew there was no going back. Despite the violence, despite the darkness of his world, she belonged to him completely. And somehow, in the midst of all the chaos and bloodshed, she'd found her home in the arms of a monster who loved her more than life itself. Blood and smoke filled the air as Vito's men stormed the Mancini stronghold. The sound of gunfire echoed through the halls, but Vito moved with deadly precision, his face a mask of cold determination. Behind him, bodies littered the ground, a testament to the price of his victory. Lena watched from a safe distance, her heart pounding against her ribs. The man she loved had become something else entirely, a force of nature, unstoppable and merciless. His hands, usually so gentle with her, now dealt death without hesitation. "It's done," one of Vito's men announced, his voice rough with exhaustion. "The Mancinis are finished." Vito's eyes found Lena's across the room. Blood stained his expensive suit, and a dark bruise bloomed along his jaw. But it was the look in his eyes that made her breath catch a mixture of triumph and weariness that spoke of the toll this war had taken. "Come here," he commanded softly, extending his hand toward her. Lena moved to him without hesitation, drawn by the magnetic pull between them. His arms wrapped around her, and she could feel his heart beating against her chest, strong, steady, alive. "I did this for us," he whispered against her hair. "Everything I am, everything I've become, it's all for you, Lena." She pressed closer to him, ignoring the metallic smell of blood that clung to his clothes. "I know," she replied, her voice trembling. "I know what you are, Vito. And I'm still here." He pulled back slightly, his dark eyes searching her face. The hardness there softened. "Just for her. You're the only thing that kept me human. Through all of this, the only thing worth fighting for." Around them, the aftermath of battle still smoldered, but in that moment, they were in their own world. Vito's hand came up to cup her face, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone who had just orchestrated so much destruction. "No one will ever threaten what's mine again," he promised, his voice low and dangerous. "You're mine, Lena. Nothing will ever change that." She knew she should be afraid of the possessiveness in his words, the darkness that lived inside him. But instead, she felt safe, protected, loved in the fierce, dangerous way that only Vito could love. "I'm yours," she whispered back, sealing their fate together. The war was over, but their story was just beginning. In the ruins of battle, they had found something unbreakable, a love forged in fire and blood, stronger than any force that dared to stand against it. The mansion was quiet now, too quiet. Lena stood at the window of her room, watching as the last traces of sunlight faded from the sky. The war was over, but she could still hear the echoes of gunfire, still smell the acrid scent of smoke and blood that had filled the air just days ago. Vito had won. The thought should have brought her comfort, but instead, it filled her with a complicated mix of relief and dread. She'd watched him transform during the battle, seen the coldness in his eyes as he'd eliminated his enemies one by one, The tender man who held her at night was also capable of such ruthless violence. A familiar presence filled the doorway behind her. She didn't need to turn to know it was him. "Come here," Vito commanded softly, his voice rough from giving orders these past few days. Lena turned, taking in the sight of him. He wore a crisp black suit, but she could see the bandages peeking out from beneath his collar. The battle had left its mark on him, both inside and out. "Is it really over?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Vito crossed the room in 3 long strides, pulling her against his chest. His touch was possessive, demanding, but there was a gentleness there that he reserved only for her. "The city is mine now," he said, his fingers trailing down her spine. "Everything I've done, every life I've taken, it was all for this, for us." Lena shivered at his words. The weight of them, the finality, settled over her like a heavy blanket. This was her life now, loving a man who ruled through fear and power. "You're thinking too much," Vito murmured, tilting her chin up. His dark eyes searched her face. "Having second thoughts?" "No," she answered honestly. "I'm just adjusting." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Good, because you're mine, Lena. Forever. No one will ever take you from me." His words should have frightened her, but instead, they sent a wave of warmth through her body. She'd crossed a line somewhere along the way, fallen so deeply for this dangerous man that she couldn't imagine life without him. Vito led her to the balcony, where the city sprawled before them like a dark canvas. His empire, their future. "I will protect you for the rest of my life," he promised, his arms wrapping around her from behind. "Everything I am, everything I have, it's yours." Lena leaned back against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. The war might be over, but their story was just beginning. And despite the darkness, despite the danger, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of her Mafia king, watching over their empire together, forever his.